So Andor is just about a month away, and it's poised to give us a much better look at the start of the Rebel Alliance, how this faction, the Alliance to Restore the Republic, came into being. So I figured today we could take a closer look at what we know so far about the start of the Rebel Alliance and the role they played in their very early days. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So the Alliance to Restore the Republic, more commonly known as the Rebellion or the Rebel Alliance, is one of the major factions within the Star Wars universe. It started as a rebellion against the Galactic Empire, and eventually formed a government known as the New Republic, which reigned in the galaxy for almost 30 years before its collapse during their war with the First Order. And while this faction does have a long and storied history, much of which we know and see on screen or read about in the books, there isn't quite as much about its very early days. I figured today we could take a closer look at what those early days were like and what the Rebel Alliance was like in its very early infancy. So let's just start right off with how the leaders of the Rebel Alliance came to be the leaders of the Rebel Alliance, and it's before the talk of any rebellion, or really an empire at all. In the days of the Old Republic, as Palpatine was continuing to reign as leader of the Republic during the Clone Wars, grabbing more and more power for himself, a group of senators formed the Delegation of 2000. The Delegation of 2000 was a group of senators who opposed Palpatine's continual power grabs and wanted him to return this power to the Senate immediately. Well, they signed a petition. They weren't able to push it into law before the end of the war and the rise of the Galactic Empire. A lot of these senators would manage to vanish within the first few years of the reign of the Empire, but those that survived would almost all go on to be founding members of the Rebel Alliance. This group included Bail Organa from Alderaan and Mon Mothma from Chandrila. So with that out of the way and the political basis for the rebellion sort of laid with the Delegation of 2000 and the senators that were already opposed to Palpatine before his rise to Emperor, let's talk about the armed resistance. This started almost immediately. Rebel factions like Saw Gerrera's partisans were almost immediately opposed to the reign of the Galactic Empire. He had led a resistance group on Andor during the war to overthrow separatist oppression, and within hours of the rise of the Galactic Empire had begun the same against the Empire. As we see in the Bad Batch, he's already starting a rebel cell to fight against Imperial oppression. This isn't really surprising, seeing the character he displayed during the Clone Wars and the training he had received from the Galactic Republic, but he wasn't the only one. Well, his war against the Empire started basically from the very beginning. During much of the time of the first 10 years of the Galactic Empire, his resistance cell was one of only a few. Another notable one, by the way, being the one carried out by Sham Syndulla against the Empire on Ryloth. We actually see the groundwork for this being laid during the events of the Bad Batch, and I believe in Season 2 we'll get to see more of this. This led him to lead his loyal supporters on Ryloth, who had fought along his side during the separatist occupation of the planet, to turn their weapons against the Galactic Empire and begin a similar resistance movement there. A resistance movement that, like Saw Gerrera's partisans, would go on for decades. But it actually took a while for the Rebel Alliance as a whole to start forming. And it started with little groups of rebel forces, small rebel cells, carrying out illegal operations, things like smuggling and delivering resources and aid to planets that the Empire maybe didn't want aid delivered to. This is likely around the time that the Spectres started to form. But at around the same time, larger groups of rebel factions started to come together, and they started to come together behind senators that had openly or quietly opposed the Empire, many for decades, and many were surviving members of the Delegation of 2000. And this is where the Rebel Alliance started to really pick up steam. It slowly began evolving from a group of small scattered rebel forces to a larger and larger faction that had more and more organization and more oversight. And as the rebel faction started to grow and unite and form one major faction, they needed sort of a leadership, or for lack of a better word, a government, to lead them to victory and to oversee the political side of this new faction. And this is where the members of the Delegation of 2000 became that rebel council that we see debating during the events of Rogue One. Now, notably, there is a pretty big gap here. There's about 10 years between the events of Jedi Fallen Order, where we start to see the beginnings of rebellion and the early formation of some of these rebel factions, like Saw's partisans fighting on Kashyyyk, for example, and the events of Star Wars Rebels, where they really start to form into the Rebel Alliance that we know. And that's the gap that I really hope to see filled with the events of Andor. I really hope we get to see these rebel factions really start to come together, and the beginning of the formation of more organized rebel forces like Phoenix Squadron, which we see in Rebels. And that's not the only thing I'm really hoping to see from Andor. It looks like Andor is going to give us a little bit of a look into the other side of this conflict as well, finally getting to really see politics of the Galactic Empire. And if you'd like to learn about some of the things I'm really hoping for from Andor, I'll leave a link up here to my video sort of reacting to the Andor trailer and going over exactly what I hope this show shows us as it comes to Star Wars politics and stuff like that. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments whether you think Andor is going to fill that gap. What do you want to see from the early years of the Rebel Alliance, and who do you think is going to make an appearance in the show that we haven't seen in the trailer? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars, leave it down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.